Let that be a warning to you. You can get kicked out for laughing through the sermon if you were paying attention to that there. But you know something? Those statements made by those famous people, they're very much representative of millions of people today, especially millennials. And why? Why do so many people not believe in God today? Well, there is one common statement that you hear again and again when people express their disbelief in God, and it's this statement: I can't believe in a God who, and then they fill in the blanks. You've heard of that. I can't believe in a God who allows children to starve in the world. I can't believe in a God who allows terrible diseases to happen to people, to good people. I can't believe in a God who allows so much suffering in the world. When you look around the world and all of the people who are suffering, I can't believe in a God who would allow that. I can't believe in a God who would allow so much poverty. You see pictures of third world countries and you see people living with absolutely nothing in shacks, and you think, if there's a good God, he would never allow that to happen. I can't believe in a God who allows poverty. And of course, you're familiar when I believe in a God who allows bad things to happen to good people or good things to happen to bad people. I'm sure you've heard one or all of these sometimes before. Maybe one of them or more of them describes why you don't believe in God. And you can understand that. I mean, how can you believe in a God who is supposed to be love and yet allows so many unloving things to happen in the world? How can you believe in a God who is supposed to be good and all-powerful, and yet he allows so many atrocities, so many terrible things to happen to people all around the world? Can you really and truly, in all honesty, believe in a God who would allow those things to happen? I can't. I'm with the millennials on this. I'm with the famous people on this. I can't believe in a God who would love and allow all these things to happen and do nothing about it. But at the same time, I'm not an atheist. I believe in God. I just don't believe in the God that the people in this video were talking about this morning. I don't believe in the God who allows all of these things to happen. You see, the God that people don't believe in today, the God that people ridicule today, is not the real God. It's what I call a straw man God that they have set up instead of looking at the real God. And you know what a straw man is. A straw man is defined as an intentionally misrepresented proposition that is set up because it's easier to defeat than an opponent's real argument. In other words, I can't really defend this, so I'm going to make it sound like this because I can attack that and I can succeed. And so when you have a straw man God, it's an intentionally misrepresented proposition that is set up because it is easier to defeat than the real God. And that's what's happened in our world today. So many people, society, leftists have set up this false God, this straw man God, and people are discrediting him as if he's a real God. If ever there was a time to have eyes to see the real Jesus, it is today. Because the God they were talking about in the clip a few moments ago is not Jesus. Jesus is not an uncaring God. Jesus is not sitting in heaven somewhere with his feet up on a cloud, totally indifferent to what's going on in the world, to the hurts and the needs of the people in the world. In fact, the truth of the matter is that Jesus has been caring for the people of the world, trying to meet their needs since the beginning of time. Jesus is actually the greatest humanitarian the world has ever known. From the time he created man and woman, he has been working tirelessly every single day, trying to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, provide housing for those who have no housing, to heal the sick, and to let the captives go free. That's the kind of God we really have. The reason that people don't see him in that way is because people are expecting God to kind of defy the laws of nature every time there is a problem or there's a danger. In other words, they're expecting God to reach down and move that car over so it doesn't hit the tree and hurt the occupants inside. They're upset because they don't think God cares because there is cancer in the world, and there's heart attacks in the world, and there's Alzheimer's disease in the world. That they don't believe in God because of these things. But the God they're talking about and the God they're describing is a straw man kind of God, and it's not the real God, and it's not the kind of God actually we really want to have. We don't want to have the God that kind of just treats us like puppets, like he's a marionette and he's just pulling the strings all the time on us. We don't want a God like that. We want the real God because the real God is better than any of us can comprehend. It's greater than any of us can imagine. Because the one true God does care for the people of the world. He does love the people of the world. He tries to meet our needs every single day and all the needs of the people all around the world. He does want us to live free of poverty and hunger. God's not pleased that there are people starving right now. And God does want us to live, you'll like this one, God does want us to live in Disney World. He wants us to live in a wonderful, wonderful world. Now you're thinking, oh, that can't be true. But you know why I say that? You know why I say he wants us to live in this kind of a world? Because of the world he created for us and put Adam and Eve in. When you go back and look at the world he gave to humanity, when you look at the Garden of Eden, it was perfect and it was complete. It was perfect. There was no pain. There was no sorrow. There's no disappointment. There's no tears. There's no hunger. There's no disease. There's no dying. There's no any of those things. It was a perfect place. It was complete. It gave them everything they needed. All of the food that they needed was there in the garden. All they had to do is eat it. They had to look after it, but they didn't have to sweat to look after it. It was kind of a joy to look after it, and they had everything they needed. And spiritually, God gave them everything anybody could want. In fact, he gave them exactly what you and I want sometimes, and that was that every day, God would come and physically walk with them in the garden, and he would talk to them just like I'm talking to you. Can you imagine that? It was the perfect, they had Disneyland on earth. I mean, all of their dreams came true every day, and they didn't even have to wish upon a star. It was all there for them. God provided everything. There was no need for hospitals because nobody got sick. There was no need for jails because nobody did anything wrong. There were no need for food banks because everybody had all they wanted. They could get out and get it. And God had planned that they would have children and they would live in this utopia, this beautiful garden that God had given that would supply everything to them. But the problem happened when Adam and Eve chose to disobey God, because when they disobeyed God, sin came into the world. And when sin came into the world, it was almost as if Adam and Eve were holding the world in their hands in the form of a beautiful vase. And when sin came into the world, it dropped from their fingers and hit a ceramic floor, and it shattered. It was broken. When they allowed sin to come into the world, they broke, and everything in the world broke with it. Indeed, when they allowed sin to come into the world, death came with it. Sickness came with it. Pain came with it. Poverty came with it. Hunger came with it. Crime came with it. None of these things were in the world that God gave to Adam and Eve. It was perfect. But it was Disneyland no longer. The rides didn't work. They even crashed. It was a terrible place. In fact, Paul, who historical writers, both secular and religious, tell us was a real active person in the first century, who spent the first half of his life trying to destroy the Church of Jesus Christ, and the last half trying to build it. He said this about the world. He said, all creation was subjected to God's curse. When Adam and Eve allowed sin to come into the world, everything broke. Even the world. And that's why there's tsunamis. That's why there are hurricanes that devastated Florida. That's why there are these earthquakes and all of these terrible things in the world, because the world is broken. Those things weren't in the world that God gave to Adam and Eve. It broke when the sin came into the world. So what did God do? When Adam and Eve broke everything, broke their relationship with him, broke the world that he had created for them, brought sin and sickness and pain and disappointment and tears into the world, what did he do? Did he kind of wipe his hands of it and say, hey man, you made your own bed, now you got to sleep in it? Did he say now the world in your life is going to be painful and terrible and hard, and the world is going to be hard? Too bad, so sad, you broke it, you did it, you blew it. That's not what he did. Some people think that's what he did, but it's not what he did. In fact, the interesting thing is, if you really look, you discover that the instant that Adam and Eve sinned and brought all of these terrible things into the world that cause us so much pain today, the instant that happened, God in his infinite love began to implement a plan that he had put in place before he ever created the world, before he ever created Adam and Eve, because he knew what mankind was like. He began to implement this plan that would slowly take the world to the place where our sinfulness and our brokenness would be remedied and restored. And it would not only be we would be restored, but actually that our world would be restored. When Adam and Eve sinned, God began a plan. And his plan involved the spiritual poverty, first of all, that mankind has. And on the spiritual poverty, it was his most elaborate and his most expensive plan. How to redeem mankind. Because his plan to redeem our spiritual poverty was his own son, Jesus Christ. That was his plan. When Adam and Eve fell, God began to implement a plan that slowly unfolded that would bring the world to Christmas, where he would send his one and only son to die on the cross that we might have forgiveness of sins, that we might be restored into a right relationship with God. And then on Easter, he would die on that cross and he'd pay that penalty. And on Easter Sunday morning, he would rise again. This is the plan that God had instantly to restore and redeem broken people. And I don't know about you, but there is no other God in the world that has ever done anything remotely close to this. Because of that, I can believe in a God in this. I can believe in a God who would do these things. And the things that people don't realize, sometimes they think, oh, that's just church. God's only interested in you spiritually and maybe in your money, but that's about it. But that's not true. Because God also had a plan for all of our other needs. Sometimes I think we miss that. I've missed this. That God had a plan before the world began, how he would meet our social needs, our physical needs, our material. He had a plan how to do all of these things. When God looks down and he sees a child dying from cancer, he's not pleased. When he sees, the hurt and the devastation that happened in Florida with this hurricane, he's not pleased with the pain that people are going through. When he sees people starving, he's not pleased with it. The reason these things happen in the world is not that God doesn't care, and it's not that God doesn't have a plan, but rather it's because when Adam and Eve sinned, all of these things, disease and terror and all these things came into the world, and we are living with the consequences of those things. But God, in the midst of them, is busy to resolve the problem and to meet the needs in our lives. The reason why so many people put up a straw man God and they try to tear him down and say, I don't believe in that kind of a God, is not because God doesn't have a plan to meet our needs or the needs of that person starving to death on the other side of the world. The reason they put up a straw man God is they don't like the plan God has. See, God, since the beginning of time, I think you'll agree with it. Since the beginning of time, our desire and our belief is that God should have a miraculous plan to meet all of our needs. Isn't that true? I mean, we expect God just to snap our fingers and we get the job. We expect God to just take his thumb and rub out cancer. We expect, if somebody's drinking and gets in a car and starts going down the road, that God will just reach down and move your car out of the way so you don't get killed by that person that was drinking and driving. That's what we think God should do it miraculously. It's all on God. But that's not the God that we have, and it's not really the God we want. Because God's plan to meet the need of every single person in the world today, his plan is us. It's you and me. In fact, if you go back to the very beginning and look at God and what he did and how he instructed the Israelites, his chosen people, you begin to see God had a plan to make sure that nobody went to bed hungry, no one starved to death. This is fascinating stuff. Because you find, this is what he wrote. This is what he wrote to the Israelites. And you got to keep in mind that almost all the Israelites at this point, they were all agricultural. They're all farmers. And this is what he said to them. He said, when you harvest the crops of your land, do not harvest the grain along the edges of your fields, and do not pick up what the harvesters drop. It is the same with your grape crop. Do not strip every last bunch of grapes from the vines, and do not pick up the grapes that fall to the ground. Don't lick the bowl clean. If he's talking to me today, he might say, don't lick that bowl after the hot fudge sundae. Leave a little chocolate on the bottom. Leave a little something there. Why did he tell them not to pick up all that stuff? Because he said, leave them for the poor and the foreigners living among you. I am the Lord your God. This was God's plan, that nobody would be hungry. Even if you were poor and you didn't have a farm, you would have enough to eat. Because when it came harvest time, the farmers would all leave stuff at the side and they'd go in. And some of them, you even read about a lady by the name of Ruth going behind them. They're gathering and they would drop them and she'd put them up and she had enough to eat. In fact, in the book of Deuteronomy, which is the 5th book in the Old Testament, written, we believe, by Moses, here's the instructions of God. But if there are any poor Israelites in your towns when you arrive in the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted or greedy or selfish or grabbing towards them. In other words, God was saying, look, when you have some stuff and you have what you need, don't hold it tight. Don't be stingy. Share it with others. Give it to those who are in need, because I've given you enough so that everybody can have some. So don't be stingy. Leave some there. Give some away. This was God's plan, so that nobody would be hungry and no one would starve to death. Everybody would have what they need. And I'm telling you, I can believe in a God like that, can't you? That has a plan that says, this is how I'm going to make sure everybody gets fed. And the part that I love is when you come into the New Testament, Jesus takes that direction from here way up to here. He doesn't decrease it. He increases it. He has an unbelievable plan so that everybody in the world can be fed and everybody can be clothed and everybody can have some place to live. Because when you look at Jesus' life, here's what you find. You find, yes, he died on the cross so that mankind's sins could be forgiven. But look at all the other things he did. He fed the hungry. He healed the sick. He gave sight to the blind. He raised the dead. He was doing all of these things to meet the physical needs of people. And he's telling us to follow his example. In fact, John the Baptizer, John the Baptist, who was the man who came before Jesus, you probably heard of him, and he baptized a lot of people. He said this, he taught this to the people. He said, if you have 2 shirts, give one to the poor. If you have food, share it with those who are hungry. If you have 2 shirts, how many shirts you got? If you walked into your closet today, I don't think you find 2 shirts. You might find 22 shirts, right? And he's saying to us, the Lord's saying to us, look, if you have 2 shirts, give half them away. You don't need 2, you only need 1. Give 1 to somebody who is in need. If you have food, share with those who are hungry. You see, that's God's plan for caring for the needs of the world, that we would share, that we would give it, not sell it, give it away. In fact, listen to John. John, who was the best friend of Jesus, the disciple of Jesus, his best friend. Here's what John teaches us. He says, if someone has enough money to live well and sees a brother or sister in need but shows no compassion, how can God's love be in that person? He says, dear children, let's not merely say that we love each other. Let us show the truth by our actions. By our actions. What Jesus taught throughout the covenant that he made with us, the New Testament, what he's sharing with us here is the way to meet the needs of the world is for everybody to share and to be generous and to give. You know, generous is a key word. You can share without being generous. If I have 22 shirts and I give you 1 shirt, am I being generous? I don't think so. I'll probably give you the one I hardly ever wear. I probably won't even notice it's gone. He says we are to be generous and to care for those who are in need. And you know something? If all the world would do these 3 things, if they just follow the plan that Jesus gave to us, everybody would have enough. I read a fascinating study that was done by McGill University in conjunction with the University of Minnesota. And the result of that study was this. Listen to this. For the past 2 decades, the rate of global food production has increased faster than the rate of global population growth. Faster. We're producing more food than we are people. The world already produces more than 1.5 times enough food to feed everyone on the planet. Did you catch that? 1.5. We have enough food right now that we could feed everybody in the world till they were full, and then give them some chips at night and maybe an apple snack in the afternoon and maybe a granola bar in the morning. We got enough right now to do all of these things that nobody in the world would go to bed hungry. We have it right now. We shouldn't be saying, I can't believe in a God who allows such poverty. We should be saying, I can't believe in a people who is allowing such poverty. Because God is providing the food to feed everybody. It's not stopped up in heaven somewhere. It's stopped up in our hands. We are the ones that are blocking it, not God. God has a plan to feed everybody, and he's fulfilling that plan. We're just not working the plan. And you know, the same thing is true. This amazes me. He has the same plan for the medical world. As I've been preparing for this message, I can't get away from this truth that I'm going to share with you because it is such an important truth. You see, it breaks God's heart when he sees all those kids in Sheol. It breaks God's heart when he walks into any hospital and sees people sick and dying of disease. God has a plan for healing. Now, sometimes that plan is miraculous. Sometimes he miraculously heals us. But most of the time, God's plan is to work through doctors, nurses, and scientists. Sometimes. Sometimes it's God's plan to take that person home to be with him. But when he brings about healing, he does it through doctors, nurses, and scientists. I mean, where do you think the wisdom and the ability to do intricate surgeries comes from? I mean, you see some of these things these surgeons do. It's amazing. Where does that come from? Where does the wisdom and the insight to create drugs and to create apparatuses that enable a person to live better and longer and healthier come from? I say it comes from God. And some of you who don't believe in God will say, yeah, of course you say that. But that takes faith. Yeah, it does. But if you ask me, it takes more faith to believe that that kind of knowledge and that kind of ability just happens by chance. Wilson Greatbatch, interesting last name, Wilson Greatbatch is a famous inventor. You may not recognize his name, but you'll recognize what he did because he is the one that invented the implantable pacemaker. You maybe have a pacemaker, some of you right now, that's saving your life. Since he invented this pacemaker, over 3 million people have had it implanted in them, and 600,000 people a year are having this pacemaker implanted in their chest, into their hearts, that is giving them quality of life and longer life. And Greatbatch worked on this invention, on this discovery, quite a bit on the campus of my alma mater at Holton College, just about an hour southeast of Buffalo. And he was working on campus that one day, near the end of his work on this apparatus, when he came to the last piece, and he couldn't figure it out. He worked and he worked and he worked. He knew he was so close. There was just the last piece of the puzzle. He couldn't get it. As hard as he worked and as much as he studied, he couldn't get the last piece of the puzzle that would make it work. And so there on the campus of Holton College, he got down on his knees and he prayed. He said, dear God, will you please help me with this? Will you please give me the wisdom? This is going to save millions of people's lives. This is going to improve the life of millions. Will you please give me what I'm missing on this? And as he's praying, God impresses on his mind a certain thing, and he got up from where he was praying, and he took that thought and he went back to his research, and it turned out to be the missing piece. And as they say, the rest is history. Now, the truth is, God will never get any credit for the pacemaker that so many people have today, that maybe someday will save your life. He'll never get credit for that. But the truth is, he's the one that gave Greatbatch the wisdom to come up with that, and he is the one that gave Greatbatch that night the last piece to the puzzle. I don't know about you, but I can believe in a God like that. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, that sounds good. And if it's true, it is good. But if it is true, then why doesn't he give us or somebody the cure for cancer? That's a really good question. It's a question I've asked, and it's a question I don't have the answer to. But what I have learned is that when I can't figure out God, or anybody else for that matter, I go back and start with what I do know and work backwards from there. So what do we know about God from what I've shared with you this morning and what you already may know about God? What do we know about him? Well, first of all, we know God loves people. God sent his one and only son to die on the cross for people. He loves people. Secondly, we know he cares for the needy and the sick. Jesus healed them all the time. We know that he gave instructions to us to share what we have with those who are in need. He's taught us how to do it. We also know he helped scientists like Great Batch to come up with some solutions that will extend people's lives. And we also know, unfortunately, that we have dropped the ball quite a bit when it comes to feeding the hungry and to clothing those who have no clothes. We've got it all that we need. We just haven't got it in the right hands, and we've dropped the ball on that. And so it makes me wonder, could it be, I'm just suggesting, I don't know this for a fact, could it be that we are dropping the ball when it comes to the solution to cancer? You see, we've kicked God out of our schools, we've kicked God out of our universities, we've kicked God out of our science labs, we've kicked God out of our government. And so maybe God has been trying to give us a solution to cancer, but we aren't listening. We aren't willing to cooperate with God. And so we're missing it. It's interesting that Great Batch invited God into his research lab, and he discovered the solution for the for the pacemaker. But scientists today are pushing God out of their labs. It seems to me more reasonable to believe that God has been trying to give us a solution, and we haven't been listening, rather than believing that he doesn't care. And I'm telling you, I believe as a result of that if ever there was a time to have eyes to see the truth, it's today. We so desperately need eyes to see who Jesus really is. Who he really is. Because I think if we look past all the straw gods that people have set up, if we would look past those and we ever discovered the real Jesus, I think we would be amazed to discover his compassion, his love, his goodness, and his plan for the world. I think we would be amazed to discover that most of the social issues that are in the world today that upset people and cause people to say, I don't believe in God, that almost all of those could be solved if we would just do what Jesus said to do, if we would just fulfill his plan, if we would just be loving on each other, if we would be caring for each other, if we'd be sharing with each other, if we'd be giving to each other. If we would do those simple things, if we would work the plan, so much that happens today that we say, I can't believe in a God, would be solved. I don't like to be political, and this really isn't political, but I got thinking when Trump and Trudeau were in their arguments over tariffs, about the USMCA, the new agreement, and they're arguing back and forth on tariffs, and if you do this, I'm going to do that, and it was all blocked up, and I got thinking, what would happen if Trudeau and Trump and the president of Mexico said, you know what, guys? Let's forget about all these tariffs. Let's just put our heads together and create an agreement whereby we could make sure that there would never, ever be anybody, not even a single child, who would go to bed hungry in North America again. Well, what if we just put our heads together and come up with a plan where we can take all of this food that we've got in abundance and we can give it to everybody so that nobody is hungry? What if we just make an agreement that we can make sure that no one goes to sleep cold on a piece of cardboard over some heating grate in a downtown of one of our cities? What if we passed that kind of an agreement? What kind of a North America would we have then? And then I got thinking, what about the churches? Well, what if the churches all got together in Ottawa and said, before we spend another dollar on buildings, what if we do everything we can together to make sure we solve the homeless problem in the city of Ottawa? to make sure that there are enough places that anybody that needs a place to sleep will have a place to sleep. And then I thought, what about you and me? It's easy to point at these folks, but what about you and me? What if you and I began to apply the teaching of Jesus, the teaching of John? What if we who have 2 shirts started giving one of them away? What would happen? Probably all of us in this room this morning have enough food in our refrigerator, in our cupboards to last our whole family this week, and probably, if we are honest, beyond that. What if this week we took half of it and gave it away? Would that make a difference in this city? Would it make a difference in us? Would it make a difference in this nation and in our world? I'll tell you, we'll never know the answer to that until we have eyes to see. Eyes to see the real Jesus. And that's why my prayer is that we would all have eyes to see the real Jesus, not the straw Jesus that people are putting up, but the real Jesus of love and compassion. I pray that every single one of us would have the courage to take an honest, serious look at the God we say we don't believe in, or the God we say we do believe in, and see if that God is the real, true God who created the world and is working every day to provide for the needs of mankind. I hope you have the courage to do that. I hope I have the courage to do that. I hope we have the courage to pray, Lord, open my eyes to see the real Jesus, to see his love and to see his plan. Because I'll tell you this, if we pray that prayer from our hearts, God's going to open our eyes. And we're going to see Jesus in a way we've never seen him before. We're going to see him and his plan, and it's going to change our worldview. It's going to change our lives. It's going to change the lives of the people around us. Because when we see the real Jesus and see the plan he has and begin implementing it, begin to love and share and give and be generous, we're going to see so many of the needs around us being met and being satisfied. But it'll never happen until you and I are willing to pray, Lord, give me the eyes to see Jesus. Will you pray that prayer? Let's pray together. Father in heaven, I'm amazed at you. It's an old song, Lord, that says, I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene. And that's how I feel this morning, that you have this unbelievable love for us. And while we've been struggling with people starving in the world, you've got a plan. And we've got the resources. All we have to do is apply your plan to the resources we have, and the starvation of the world is ended. And Father, you have a plan for meeting the needs in our community, where we work and where we live. And we're that plan. You give us resources that we can be the solution to so many problems. Father, I pray that today, that we would look beyond the straw Jesuses that have been set up, beyond those Jesuses that were talked about in the clip by those famous people this morning, because they weren't talking about you. They obviously have never really seen you or known you, because if they did, they would change. But because you are the very God they want to believe in. So Father, would you give each of us here today and this week the courage to honestly get alone and ask you to give us eyes to see you as we've never seen before. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.